Hello and welcome to the GBC Productions channel. This is episode 81, which is also part 5 of the engine rebuild. In this video we're going to be wrapping it up and getting everything back together. Right now the pistons and the lifters are in, along with the camshaft and the crankshaft. Next step is to put the head gasket on and put the cylinder head on. But before I do that, I want to clean out the bolt holes. I'm going to use a tap and just chase the threads. Once I've chased the threads, I'm going to go ahead and spray it with brake cleaner and then blow some air in there to get all the debris out. I can't recall what size tap this is, but I'll tell you as soon as I get it back out of here. The tap is a 7/16 by 14. I'll go ahead and clean the rest of these off camera. Now the head gasket will just set in place. I just set it onto the little dowels, and this one even says up to make sure it's sitting the right way. Take you off the tripod for a moment to show you that it says up right there. Just don't want to put it on upside down. So I'm putting thread sealant on the bolt threads. It does have its own sealant on there, but I don't trust that. I'm putting some fresh stuff on. Then I'll put the bolt in and start at a few threads. All the bolts are in, they're just started a few threads. Now I have to torque them down to specs. Now the next step is to torque them down to 25 foot-pounds all the way around. And the torque pattern on this engine is a spiral pattern, and that's pretty typical on most cylinder heads that I've done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's the typical spiral pattern. So we'll get them to 25 foot-pounds. Alright, here I have a torque angle meter set up. I've already gone around and torqued them down to 25 foot-pounds. Now I have to go an additional 90 degrees. Right now the needle is pointing at 0. Obviously I don't really need this being that it's 90 degrees, but I have it here just to show it. The flexible part with the alligator clip just hooks up to something solid. Now I'm also going to have my torque meter hooked up. Once I get this done, I'll be back. Now we're on to the timing chain. Now before the chain goes on, I have to make sure the cam and the crank are set to top dead center, which they already are. So now we're going to line up the timing mark on the cam sprocket and the crank sprocket. We'll line up the two little dimples and we'll slide everything on together. I've got to go get the chain, it's been soaking in oil. The chain and sprockets are on. I have to tighten down the cam sprocket. Now there is a magnet here for the cam sensor. The magnet has a little pin that lines with the hole, and then we'll put the bolt through and tighten it down. Now I have to put on the timing chain damper. Before putting the damper on, I'll give it a little push to get all the slack to one side. When the damper goes in place, I'm going to have to fiddle with the spring a little bit. I'll be back. Here's the damper installed. The tail of the spring fits in this little hole here. And the other part of the spring is right where it should be. It just keeps the slack out of the chain. The bolt does have blue Loctite on it. Now that the timing chain's on, it's time to go to the push rods and rocker arms. Before I go to that, I'm going to put on the cam button. And that's just a little bearing on a spring, and it just presses right in place. I'm coating the ends of the push rods with the assembly grease I used on the lifters and camshaft. And then I just send them down through the hole on top of the lifter. I'll take you off the tripod again and show you. That seats right down into the top of the lifter. Right through the hole of the cylinder head. I'll get the rest of these in, we'll come back with the rocker arms. I've already done the other side. A little more assembly grease on the tips of the valve stems. Here's the rocker arm. I'm going to put a little assembly lube in there on the surfaces that move. And there's a bracket that goes in here. My hands are kind of in the way. And then we'll torque this down to factory specs. Now here's the intake gasket in place. On the ends there are these rubber strips here that have to go in place. I will be putting some silicone sealant right at the ends. And then I'll set the intake in place. I've set the intake on. I do have to torque it down to specs. I have some hoses to replace. I'll get that done and we'll move on to the next step. The throttle body is back on. I've put in a new thermostat right here. Now I have to put in the upper hose fitting. To hold that in, there is a bracket and then one bolt. I'll have to go find it. Alright, the timing chain cover is on. The oil pump does have to be lined up with the crank sprocket. You can see the little flat spots there, kind of. I've tightened all the bolts down except for these two. This is where the crankshaft position sensor goes. I'll get the water pump and the oil filter on later. The next step, I'm going to put on the oil pan. With the engine upside down, I need to put sealant here, 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 and here. Then I can put the gasket on. I put the sealant on. Now while that's setting a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and put the pickup tube on. There's a little gasket that goes here, then the tube goes on, and then a couple bolts. Alright, the oil pan is on, the spark plugs are in, and the oil filter is on. Then I have to go put on the exhaust manifolds. The exhaust and the valve covers are on. The valve covers on this are pretty straightforward. They're acorn nuts. You just tighten them down all the way and you're fine. I still have to put on some more piping, some vacuum lines and coolant lines. I still have to find all the other parts. I'm going to go ahead and do all the rest off camera. I will show some pictures with it completed. Here's a few pictures with everything assembled. Don't forget to subscribe for more, mash that like button, and comment below. Until next time, this is Uncle D from GBC Productions, signing off.